I remember when Prince George was born in the UK. It marked the first time that there were three um, living possible monarchs in the UK for like 150 years. Um, Prince George, of course, is the first child of Prince William and his wife Camilla. Camilla, easy for you to say. Um, But different people had different reactions. You know, those on the inner circle got into the pomp and the circumstance and the celebration of the new baby, but for the most part, everybody else just sort of kept living their lives. That's very much what happened when baby Jesus was born, or should I mention, King Jesus was born. There are different reactions to the newborn king, and that's kind of what we're looking at here in Matthew chapter 2. Open your Bible, fire up your electronic device, and let's dive in together. This is the Underground Bible Study. I'm Steve Ashworth, your host. And this channel is geared toward two groups of people. Number one, if you're a follower of Christ, my job is to get you just as strong and healthy in the Lord as possible. Welcome. Let's dive in together. Second group of people is those of you who don't have a relationship with God, but you're curious. Maybe no one has explained Christianity to you before, and it's been very confusing and frustrating. Welcome. Let's get into the Word together. All right, we're going to pick it up in Matthew chapter 2 and verse 7, right in the middle of the story. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." Oh, that's interesting. It sounds like Herod wants to worship him. What do you think? You go down to verse 13 in this very same chapter, and you find out exactly what's going on. Matthew 2, verse 13, when they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. "Get up," he said, "take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." If I'm going to seek out the baby king, I've got to allow Jesus to be who he is and listen to his claims on my life. Herod didn't want any part of it. It's kind of like a story I heard a guy named Jeff Walling tell years ago. There was a lady who had a yardage shop where she cut cloth for sewing. One day the man from the Bureau of Weights and Measures came in, as they would do in the old days, to check her measurements. He brought with him the metal yardstick sent out by the Bureau of Weights and Measures that was exactly 36 inches. He came in and said, "Where's your yard? I'm here to measure it." She grinned and he said, "Well, what's so funny?" She said, "Let me show you. Only have one in the shop." She took him to the back and showed him an old wood measure, beautifully etched in oak, exquisite markings. She said, "My grandfather etched this when he opened this shop 69 years ago." He said, "This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." She said, "There's no telling how many yards of fabric have gone over this yard all around the world through the years." He said, "This is something else. Let me just get this out of the way." So he laid out his perfect measure and adjusted and readjusted. And he said, "Ma'am, this is a full inch and a half short." She said, "That can't be. That's impossible." He said, "I'm not trying to make trouble. I'm just here to measure your yard. This yard I have is perfect. I know. And your yard is short." She said, "You're calling my grandfather a cheat. You're calling him a liar. Get out of here. Why, how dare you come in here and talk about my family like that?" And he said, Lady, I don't know your grandfather. I just met you. I'm just telling you that your yard is short." How many people hear the story of Jesus and they say, "Well, that's not what my granddad said"? You're saying my mother's lost, aren't you? And Jesus says, "I'm not saying anything about your family. I'm simply saying that this is my way, and you either accept it or you refuse it." John 14 and verse 6, Jesus said, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." When I, like Herod, try to figure my way around Jesus, I'm scheming. I mean, do you need it all proved in the lab before you're going to believe it? I'm never going to be made right with God because I have everything figured out. I mean, what's the formula for turning water to wine, for healing a leper, for creating a catch of fish so large it almost sank the boat, for healing a paraplegic, for raising Lazarus from the dead? How did Jesus come out of the grave alive? How was he born of a woman who had never had sexual relations? We find ourselves standing with the man born blind in John chapter 9, verse 25, when he said, "Whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see." Herod had a scheming heart, but now we notice a sacrificial heart. Matthew 2, verse 9. After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. So you have the religious indifference of the religious leaders. You've got Herod's hatred toward the truth and wanting to run his own life. And now you got the Magi. Now the Magi were Gentiles coming from either Babylon or Persia. And that trip could take several months. They see his star in the east. They've learned a little bit of prophecy about the Messiah. And they go, "Hey, what was that we studied about that star? We got to go check this out." So they get a caravan together, they travel for months, they show up in Jerusalem, and they're not put off by the fact that nobody there seems to care. Having heard a little bit of the truth, they diligently seek and find him. How far would you and I go to find Jesus? First of all, they pursued their goal. Nothing was going to stop them from following the star. I'm impressed with their intentness in finding Jesus. Surely they were weary from such a long journey. And when the star stopped, they were overjoyed. Joy is always the result of seeking and finding Jesus. Now think of that. The star stopped over the house. Remember that you're receiving this from Matthew, a man who had first-hand knowledge and an interview possibility with Mary. Do you believe his account? You've got a prophecy from 1,500 years before Christ coming true right here. And you've got a man telling you, based on an eyewitness account, that a star stopped over the house. Matthew is telling us that prophecy is being fulfilled, and something only God could do was occurring. Matthew 2, verse 11. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and of incense and of myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. So not only did they pursue their goal, but they presented their gifts. We notice three things about worship in these two verses. First of all, worship is adoration. Notice again that they came to the house and not to the manger. Remember that they had originally gone to Bethlehem to register as part of the tribe of David. Joseph and Mary did. Maybe they just decided they would find a place to live there. But when the Magi found Jesus, they worshiped him. They walked right by Mary, and these Gentiles started worshiping Jesus. One of the interesting things about this story is in how it often differs from the traditional Christmas story. The Christmas cards will depict the Magi or the wise men bringing their gifts to the baby at the manger, right? Well, like we said last week, the manger scene is in the book of Luke. The Magi, the wise men, are here in Matthew. Worship is adoration, but secondly, worship is generosity. They bring their gifts to Jesus at the house where he lived several months after he had been born, and then they offered their gifts to him. Matthew says they opened their treasures, not their saddlebags. You know what that means? It means they brought a bunch of stuff. Gold, incense, and myrrh were gifts you would bring to honor a king. The Magi brought the best they had and they gave it to Jesus, and you and I are supposed to do the same, right? People assume that since there were three gifts, there were three guys. However, Matthew doesn't tell us how many Magi they were. We know the Christmas song says, "We three kings of Orient are," but Matthew doesn't say that they're kings. There's a whole lot of tradition that has gotten mixed up with the actual Bible story. Luke chapter 2, verse 22 says, "When the time of their purification according to the law of Moses had been completed, Joseph and Mary took him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord, as it is written in the law of the Lord. Every firstborn male is to be consecrated to the Lord, and to offer a sacrifice in keeping with what is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of doves or 2 young pigeons." When you trace that verse back to the Old Testament, you realize that a pair of doves or 2 young pigeons were the sacrifice you would make if you were too poor to offer anything else. After the Magi showed up, however, they could buy a whole herd of sheep. In fact, they now had the resources to fund the trip to Egypt that they were about to make. The Magi heard some prophecy and they followed it out to see if these things were true. Having found that these things are true and having come face to face with Jesus, the first thing that they want to do is worship him. And verse 12 says, "And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route." Worship is adoration, worship is generosity, but thirdly, worship is also obedience. The Magi were warned in a dream. I think God was able to appear to them in a dream because he knew that they would listen. They were Gentiles, non-Jews. They didn't have the strongest theology, but they had seeking hearts that had taken them from their homeland to seek out the baby king. The kind of hearts the Magi had always get God's attention. I don't care who you are or where you come from. If you have that kind of a heart, you will always have the attention of heaven. They remember what Herod said to them, but only God knew why Herod said to them. Herod is a paranoid dictator and threatened by the birth of this baby who could be the fulfillment of prophecy. So God changes their course away from Herod and sends them home on another way. So which one are you? Are you like Herod, determined to run your own show? Are you like the religious leaders and indifferent to the fact that God calls you to a relationship with him through faith in his son? Or are you like the Gentile Magi who heard a little bit of the truth and they said, "That's amazing. I've got to find out more." Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.